I think there's a temptation a lot of times when I talk to people about my career, or maybe they see something that was posted on LinkedIn or an award I won or something like that, to think that, maybe things have always been easy and it was just kind of this linear path. I've been very fortunate. I've trained in, fantastic places. I've had wonderful mentors and been at, some of the kind of highest ivory towers in this country. But no, it has not been, a smooth path. It's not even really the linear path that maybe it looks like in many different ways. At the beginning, I have to kind of start with my parents. So my parents are both from Ghana. They're both from a small fishing village in Ghana, Elmina, Ghana, and came to the United States. My father for college, which he started community college, staying with an uncle who, through the Catholic Church, had managed to make it to Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where again my siblings and I were all born in Milwaukee. And my mother came after college, and they got married, and again we were all born here. And they did very well, in business. My dad did some business consulting and became a managing partner for one of the large firms, and my mother took various managerial positions, across different large corporations. I did have several advantages growing up as far as the schools I went to, good public schools, and the ability to do extracurricular activities. My siblings and I were all in Montessori schools when we were growing up, which my mom had gotten a master's in education and kind of keyed in on, maybe that was something that could help us for our brain development and growth. But, when you look at medicine, and particularly medicine at the levels that I've tried to get to, there's a little bit of, inside information that's useful that I didn't really have growing up. My father actually wanted to be a physician, and he went so far as to take the MCAT. But as an immigrant from Ghana in the United States, most medical schools wouldn't even send him an application form when he would try to apply at the time that he did in the 70s. Again, he did quite well, but he didn't have medical knowledge as far as how to navigate the application process and what things I should be doing to make myself attractive as a physician. One of the things that I used to do, I grew up partially in Northern Virginia, in Falls Church, Virginia, and I knew that there was this thing called the National Institutes of Health that was in Maryland, not far, and it was this wonderful place where you could do phenomenal science. And I would go and look, at the various programs that they had. By the time I got to college, it was online. You could look on the website, and I would apply for these opportunities. Even before that, when I was in high school, my parents would bring us back to the U.S. from Ghana and we'd spend the summers in Falls Church, and I'd apply for summer programs at the National Institutes of Health. And I never got in. And I was so confused because I would apply, and I had pretty good grades. I had good extracurriculars. I thought I was a decent writer, so I figured my essays and stuff were pretty good for the essay questions that they had. And I never got in, and I was just so bewildered by that. Until the first NIH experience that I actually had, being on campus and having an opportunity, was in residency. So I had, in another failure, I'd applied for a research grant. And at the time, there was a neurosurgeon here at Emory, Nelson Oisiku, who was a great mentor of mine, almost like an uncle, a couple times removed, in that he had immigrated to the U.S. from Nigeria, which is not far from Ghana, and so he'd always kind of looked out for me and all the residents here. And we had talked about this fellowship I was applying for, where I was going to do endoscopic pituitary type surgery and look at this particular endoscope with a robotic arm, and the opportunity was in France, in Paris. And he had gotten a colleague who had agreed to host me and do this, and did all that and applied, and I didn't get the funding. And I was crushed, and so I had this 8-month hole in my 6th year of residency where I didn't have anything lined up. And I'd done some research at Winship Cancer Institute with an investigator here at the time, Kostas Hadjipanayas, and published some work and learned some things about convection-enhanced delivery and that sort of thing, but I wanted to learn more. And I didn't know what to do. But recently I had met another neurosurgeon, Russell Lonzer, who was the chief of the surgical neurology branch at the NIH in Bethesda. And he had given a talk on how they were doing convection-enhanced delivery in primates and in early clinical trials, and were really pushing the field forward. And so my parents still had a condo in DC, even though they lived in Ghana full time. And I had just gotten married, and I incidentally had convinced my wife to move from DC down to Atlanta, but I came up with this plan. I was like, hey, what if I go to the NIH, and they don't even have to pay me. I'll stay in my parents' condo, okay? And I'll stay there for the 8 months, and I'll just do research for free. Nelson, what do you think? And so Dr. Isiku was like, that's a great idea. And so he fires up his BlackBerry. I mean, this was back in 2011. And he fires off an email to Russ Lonzer. And within seconds, Russ says, great, we'll take him. And so I go through all this process, and I get the fellowship. But when I got there, I realized that actually a lot of people that have positions at the NIH from a trainee perspective know somebody who knows somebody at the NIH. Later in my career, I did a fellowship in neurosurgery, neurosurgical oncology at UTMB Anderson Cancer Center. Spent a year in the lab of Amy Heimberger. And Dr. Heimberger is a phenomenal researcher, one of the pioneers of immune therapy for brain tumors, now at Northwestern. I was getting recruited for jobs at the NIH. Having spent time as a fellow there, I was high on their list of people to come on because they needed a brain tumor neurosurgeon. And I ended up getting hired back at the NIH again because I knew the people there. And then when I was there as a PI, I would get these emails from people that knew that what you needed to do to get a research position was not just put your application in the system, because nobody went into the system and looked at the hundreds of applications that were just sitting there to try and choose the best people. People would contact the labs directly, send them a cover letter, explain why they wanted their lab, and if they could, have somebody else they already knew introduce them to the lab PIs. And so, they have taken some measures to reduce some of the nepotism there. But there was a fair amount, quite honestly, as far as, people who's, ran labs in the Cancer Institute might have a kid that then went and did research in the Neuro Institute. And those weren't the sorts of opportunities that I had. As far as other challenges, in college at Stanford, had a great time in college and studied hard and did a lot of extracurriculars. In Stanford, one of the things that it had at that time was a really strong Black community. Across the various communities, they had strong ethnic communities that had very active social programming. And I was in my sophomore year, a very dynamic kid, someone who was very interested in working with people and helping people if I could. And I got busy doing these extracurricular activities. I was a member of a fraternity, Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, same fraternity of Martin Luther King and Thurgood Marshall. And there was a lot of service that was involved in being in that fraternity. And I threw myself into that. I actually ended up being elected to the board of directors for the national organization in doing that work. The student kind of union for the college, the ASSU, I was elected as a senator for that. I was the treasurer of the Black Student Union. And in doing these things, trying to raise funds for a high school conference and flying to various board meetings for Alpha Phi Alpha, it was a little tough to stay on top of biomechanical engineering and the pre-med recs and everything else. And so my grades would slip, which was a completely new phenomenon for me. I did not know anything of C's. I mean, a B minus was like an apoplectic event, in middle school or high school. But I got some grades that weren't great at one point. And so leading up to the time to apply for medical school, I actually met with a pre-med advisor, and I was supposed to meet with them earlier, but sat down with them, and they're like, oh, I don't know about this transcript. I don't know if you're going to get into medical school. You're just not, doing that strong. I was like, yeah, but I'm a really strong test taker, so I'm going to do well on the MCAT, and and I can pull these grades up. And they're like, yeah, I don't know. I think you're going to need, at the very minimum, to take some time out, maybe get a master's, that sort of thing, before you apply to medical school. And I didn't listen, which I try to listen to advice when I can, but I was just like, I think I'm going to make it work. And I was fortunate. My younger brother who's now an attorney and working in business, was an undergraduate at the University of Pennsylvania at the time, and I was doing an internship. And I decided I was going to fly out to Philly for the summer. This was the summer between my junior and senior year, and I was going to find a way to do the things to get myself into medical school. So I took organic chemistry over the summer, again, at Temple, and threw myself into that, convinced I have to get A's in organic chemistry this whole time through. So I took the whole year course in like a 12-week span, and studied for the MCAT. That's all I did all summer, on a shoestring budget, and studied, and I did get those A's in organic chemistry, and I got a really good score on the MCAT, very strong, 90 whatever percentile. And so came out of that summer feeling pretty good. I was like, I think I did that. I think I'm fine. So I go and meet with the pre-med advisor again. She's like, yeah, I know, I see the MCAT score, and that's good. And I see that you got those organic chemistry grades, but I still don't think it's going to happen. So my dad actually, I talked to him, and I was like, I talked about applying to medical school this year. I don't think I can do it. I think I have to take this year of grad school, like the pre-med advisor told me. And so my dad looked at me and he said, but you worked hard, right? And I was like, yeah, I did. I really did. I really tried. He's like, and you think that you did your best in all these? And I was like, yeah. It's like, well, then you take what you've done and you send it to the medical schools and you let them evaluate you and you try. And if you don't get in, we'll figure it out from there. But you show them your body of work. And I did apply, and I didn't get in everywhere that I applied, but I did get into the University of Pennsylvania. I got into the University of Michigan and Columbia. And at the end of the day, loved the environment and everything that I had at the University of Pennsylvania, and decided to go there for medical school. And I think that worked out really well for me. There have been various challenges when one talks about my neurosurgical career itself. One of the things that I've done more of really in the wake of the George Floyd murder, which is different from the beginning of my career, is I've talked a lot about my experience as a black person in neurosurgery. There are not a lot of black people in neurosurgery, and having recently looked at the data and published a letter on this in the Journal of Neurosurgery, we sit at around 4% of the practicing neurosurgeons in the country, whereas black people make up about 13% of the population of the country. There's a big gap there. And so, when one moves in neurosurgical circles and knowing how slowly we train neurosurgeons, the number of neurosurgeons that there are, the field is older. It is one of the more homogenous specialties when it comes to ethnicities. It's more white than some other more progressive specialties. It's more male dominated, to be more specific. And so it's not really a place to jump out and shout around and say, well, this is my experience being a black person. This is what's going on. And it's 2022, so the experiences with race that people have today and that I have are not the experiences that people had in the 50s and 60s, but there are some experiences. One of the stories I've started telling recently is actually my Black in the Ivory story, which was this thing that was going around shortly after George Floyd was murdered in 2020, where people in institutions like this were talking about things that had happened to them that were unexpected, related to race, due to the fact that they were black. And mine is this. So when I applied to neurosurgery, my very first neurosurgery interview, and neurosurgery interviews are difficult to get. You apply to a bunch of programs, applied to 33. Applicants apply to even more now. Sometimes they apply to all of the residency programs. I got 13 interviews. But at the very beginning, you don't know which interviews you get, and they kind of roll in with time. And it was actually a little bit more loosely regulated when I applied than it is today. And so I get my first interview in October, and I'm super excited. It's just out. But that's the only interview I have. So I go to this institution, and I'm just excited to be there, right? I've got this roommate, and they take us on a tour of the city, which incidentally did include pointing out that there was a Confederate museum to see. But sat down for my first interview, and that first interview went great. one of the professors there, and talked about my research and my interest in neurosurgery and why I wanted to be a neurosurgeon. And he seemed to be recruiting me to the institution. I was like, okay, this is going off to a flying start. My second interview, I sat down with the chair. And when I sat down with the chair, they said, I've been looking at your CV, and it's really interesting. I was like, yeah, okay, yeah, that's good. He's like, yeah, I see you've lived in both the United States and in Ghana. I was like, yes. He's like, that's pretty rare that have people that lived in both America and Africa. I was like, yeah, my parents are from there, and I told him a little bit about that. He's like, yeah, I saw your CV, and I've been meaning to ask you this question. I just immediately when I saw your background. And I've been looking at all this footage of Hurricane Katrina. So this is October 2005. So Hurricane Katrina just hit not that long ago, and there was still cleanup, and everything was going on with FEMA and tents. And so he goes on. He said, and I've been looking at this footage, and I've been just thinking, sitting there with my wife, watching TV, and thinking, how could we help these people? What could we do? How could we make things better for them? And I had this idea, and I wanted to run it by you because of your unique background, and I wanted to see what you think. What if we gathered up, a bunch of the people and put them on cruise ships and sent them to Africa, and saw what happened? And it'd just be so much better than them, and that they've lost their homes here, and they have all this poverty, and they're dealing with racism. Well, not really racism, but just the issues they have, and not having their homes and jobs, and they could go there and they wouldn't have those problems. What do you think? So here I am, someone who has dreamed of being a neurosurgeon, since I don't know, 8, 9, and I'm at my first full interview weekend, and I'm asked this question. And I've also been told many times that neurosurgery is this very small specialty where all the chairs know each other, they call each other, and they talk about applicants and that sort of thing. So I also can't, piss off this guy or insult him or anything like that. I've got to come out of this unscathed. And I'm not particularly proud of my answer, but what I told him was, well, sir, I've having lived in Ghana and visited a couple other countries, a lot of the countries in Africa are quite poor. And so if you send a bunch of poor people to poor countries, I don't know that they would do that well. He's like, oh, that's a fair point. And he goes on to conduct what would otherwise be a normal interview. But my head's in the clouds, right? I go through the rest of the interview day, and I'm like, did that really just happen? And talked to a few people afterwards back at my medical school about it. But, didn't raise a stink or anything, or because it was just like, well, I don't know what to do with this. But that's my introduction to neurosurgery. In 2005, again, this isn't, the 50s or the 40s or anything like that. And so, you can imagine what that did to me, what it does to someone. You're thinking about your place in this specialty, and, do you belong there? And that story is I think shocking. It's not necessarily the worst thing that's happened to me in neurosurgery. I think it's a thing that kind of grabs people when I tell them. But it's an illustration that, unfortunately, racism still does, exist and pervade in our society. And, neurosurgery, unfortunately, is no exception. Can one excel despite that? Of course one can. And there's numerous examples of Black people that have done phenomenal things in neurosurgery, and I'm trying to be one of them. But, in 2017, when I became the chair of the Young Neurosurgeons Committee, that was the first Black person to do that. And when firsts happen in this day and age, you have to wonder what was happening before, right? So there have certainly been challenges along the way. I think that when one is pursuing anything as challenging as neurosurgery inherently is itself, there are going to be challenges no matter what your background is. What I always tell people is you kind of have to have a guiding star that keeps you going as to why you're doing that specialty altogether, and to keep that North Star going and to know why it is that when those tough times hit, that you have to keep moving, that you have to continue going, because it's got to be you. You have to do this thing. This is the thing that you were born to do. For me, I knew that from all my experiences, from when I was a kid all the way up through medical school, that neurosurgery was a calling of mine, and that I knew I could do a really good job at it. That there were patients that I could help. That brain tumors were something I could study and make a difference in. And so that would keep me going when there wasn't a great day. But if there wasn't a great day, then there was another day when I got to assist on a really challenging case and help a patient with a brain tumor, talk to that family member, and show that there was something that I had to offer, and you could always bounce back with that.